now it's recording for some reason. All
Okay.
right, hold on, Eric. I'm going to change it over to you.
Sounds good.
All right, there we go.
All right, welcome everybody. On here with me tonight, we have myself, and let me tell you a little bit about myself and my colleague. And so what I want to actually do, hang on, just make sure I got the PowerPoint pulled up here. What I want to do is talk a little bit about myself. I'm a parent of a child, a 9-year-old who's class 2 deletion positive with Angelman syndrome, has been fully included. Until this year, we're doing about a 50-50 split, 50% inclusion and 50% in a special ed classroom setting. My background is that I have my doctorate in education. I'm a certified school counselor. I have a certificate in intellectual and developmental disabilities, and I'm extremely passionate about IEP. So now I'm going to let my colleague, Michelle, introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michelle Harvey. I am currently living in Nashville, Tennessee, and I teach special education at an elementary school. I also am a board-certified behavior analyst. I am the oldest of 3 kids, and my youngest brother, Matthew, has Angelman syndrome. He is now just turned 20. Well, just in July, he turned 20. And he lives in Southern California with my parents, and so it has been a very interesting kind of ride going through my career as a sibling of an individual with a severe disability, as well as looking at everything from the school perspective. So yeah, on that note, Eric, you want to take us away?
All right, yeah, let's first talk about our agenda this evening. And so the agenda is going to be as follows tonight. We've got really 8 kind of points that we're going to hit on: the importance of the IEP, the evaluation and the IEP process, who actually attends these IEP meetings, what are the components of the IEP. Then we're going to get in the meat of the IEP, give you some examples, briefly talk about a transition plan for older children, middle school aged, and then what to do after the meeting. So with that being said, I'm going to move on to slide 3. Let's talk about the importance of the IEP. So the importance of the IEP, let's just kind of get into this. First off, the IEP is required by law, and it's part of IDEA 2004. It's really the, IDEA is Individuals with Disability Education Act, and it was reauthorized in 2004. And what it does is it tells the who, the what, special education, where, the when, and the why, and the how. And the law is very specific. It tells you details that you need to know when you're preparing a plan, plus it provides a framework for the acronym FAPE, which is Free, Appropriate Public Education in the least restrictive environment, what that looks like for that child. So let me just kind of give a quick example, and that's like the LRE for my daughter, who is in the mainstream about 45% of the time. She attends a special ed classroom setting with a small group setting of maybe 8 to 10 students, 1 special ed teacher, 2 assistants, maybe 3 at times. She also then gets in the mainstream in a 3rd grade classroom, where in the mainstream she may eat lunch with her peers, participate in health and wellness activities, participate in science and social studies, core content, curriculum, and a gen ed setting, and also does a little bit of reading there. So the importance really is that we have to understand that there is a law that covers parents like us, siblings, or our siblings, like in Michelle's case. It covers those children to ensure that they're getting a free, appropriate public education as required by law. Now, real quickly, I'm going to go through just this evaluation process and just thinking about the whole process of getting an IEP. So it's cyclical, as the process shows here. First and foremost, there's generally going to be what's called the referral for testing. In a lot of cases, it often happens at the time our children are moving from early intervention services, where they were in an early intervention setting getting speech education, occupational therapy, physical therapy, maybe a little developmental intervention play group. It depends state to state, up from 0 to 3. And then in Kentucky, for example, through the child find process, we make those transitions occur naturally. And when I say naturally, that means that we encourage a parent at the 3-year-old age of their child to start the process of developing an individual education plan. And it could be a service plan where they are not actually attending school full-time, or it can be where they're attending the appropriate early childhood program provided at the district, and they're included with their typical peers at that point. After they do the referral for testing or they make that transition, either one can occur. You meet to determine if the testing yields eligibility for special education. I have not ever seen a case where a child with Angelman syndrome has not met the eligibility for special education. That's not to say it can't happen, but I sure have talked with a lot of people over the years, and a lot of children of the parents, all of them have always qualified for special education IEP. And so yes, then an IEP is developed. IEP is an acronym for Individual Education Program. And it's developed because it's really the program that's encompassing the educational framework for your child. Once the IEP is agreed upon, it goes in effect for 1 year with very distinct goals and very distinct objectives. And then annually, your next IEP happens every year. And then, as required by law, every 3 years from eligibility date, the team must meet again to review if the student is still eligible for special education services. So that's the process. Now I'm going to turn it over to Michelle and let her speak about the next item on the agenda is the who attends the meeting.
Right. So who attends the meeting? Required by law is a special education teacher, a general education teacher, a district representative. Usually this ends up being an administrator. I know at my school either our assistant principal or our principal will attend. And then somebody to interpret test data. So for eligibility meetings and where you're looking at reevaluations, this is often the school psychologist. But I know that for yearly IEP meetings, for example, at the district that I work at, I am the person that's interpreting any test data and kind of putting that into our IEPs on what assessments we have done in the last year. Others who may attend, parents. It is required to invite the parents, but you can have an IEP without parents if parents agree that that is okay. So for the most part, parents are generally required to attend. Speech therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, any other sort of related service providers are going to be in attendance as well. That could be behavior consultants to the school. That can also be parents. You can invite any private speech, OT, PT therapists, any private behavior consultants or therapists that you're working with. You can also bring advocates. You really can bring anybody that you want to have a say in the meeting, in your child's education, and that who you also would feel comfortable kind of would you know, be there for support. I think is the main point there. So Eric, can you hit the next slide for us?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, next, components of the document. So this is just in general what we're going to see throughout, just kind of in general, you know, general summary of the IEP itself. There's always going to be a parent concern section. So this is where you have your opportunity to get into the IEP, whatever concerns, thoughts you have for the upcoming year, goals you want them to work on. For some meetings, I have copied and pasted into the IEP document what the parents want written in there. Other times parents are okay with discussing it at the meeting and me typing in kind of as they're going and paraphrasing. But it really should be, this section should be what you want portrayed in the IEP as your concerns for the next year. Then the next section is just kind of, in shorthand, we call present levels. Some districts and schools will call them present levels of academic achievement and performance, also known as present levels of performance, or PLEP, present levels of educational performance. They're all, in general, they're the same thing. And it really is just a description of the present level of the student's functioning in that domain. So, for example, if reading is an area we're looking at in this section, we're going to have formal testing data that we've done in the area of reading. We're going to have informal data and observations, data that we've taken on previous goals, on where they are right now, observations of when we're working with them on reading, what can they do, what can't they do, any sort of checklist, assessments, again, observations. You want this to be a positive section on what the student can do. You also want it to clearly identify kind of the deficits and weaknesses and where you're going to be, because this is mainly where you're going to be deriving your goals from. So that leads right into number 3. You're also going to have the goals for the year broken down into short-term objectives for what the IEP team is going to be working on for the upcoming year. And then derived straight from that are the services and support. So when and where the school will be providing the services to accomplish those goals, how often the services will be provided, how long they're going to last, if it's 2 times a week for 30 minutes or all day in this setting, or a paraprofessional or educational assistant in the gen ed classroom for a certain time. That's all got to be in the IEP. And then 5th, the accommodations. If the student happens to be taking the standardized assessments, if what accommodations they're going to be receiving in order to access those assessments needs to be listed in the IEP. If the student is not taking these tests, then and is taking some sort of alternate assessment, then the IEP must include the explanation of why those tests are not appropriate and how they will be assessing the student instead. Then if you have any sort of behavior intervention plan, ESY is just the fancy term for summer school if your district is offering or providing that. Special transportation should go in the IEP. Anything else, all those special factors has got to be somewhere in there because that IEP itself is a legal binding document. And then lastly, you're going to have signature pages at the end. And actually, I was going to talk about the different signature pages, but we'll get to that at the end. So let's move through, and then if there's questions about signature pages too, we'll address that at the end.
Hey, Michelle, can I add a little something on present levels?
Of course.
Today I was in a meeting and under present levels. Michelle made a comment about that your present levels could be specific to various domains too. So let's kind of clarify what those can be. So like communication is an area of domain where you want to get a real feel for what the present levels in communication, and where another domain could be social and adaptive, adaptability or social emotional can be a domain. You can also have a domain that is very specific to health and vision. So you can think about, okay, so it should give a real, when you're thinking about your child, when you're developing an IEP, you really need to have a full present level of their performance in every domain that would be available to you. So I often look at IEPs, and I also often look at evaluations, and in doing so I want to make sure that the special ed teacher doesn't leave out some important information on present levels that is definitely relevant to our children with Angelman syndrome. and that was
right,
just one thing I want. Go ahead, Michelle.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say, to piggyback on that, as a teacher that has received IEPs from other districts in the state, even other states with people moving to the state of Tennessee, it's important to keep in mind that not having any other information except that IEP document, I, as a teacher, need to be able to pick up that IEP and know your child and be able to teach your child and have a really good idea of where they are, what they can do, and what they can't do, which is why those present levels, it is so important to be really descriptive, because who knows if you're going to up and move, or if a new teacher is going to come in, you want everything to be in that document to get a really good snapshot of the student. And I also wanted to point out that just from the school district and the teacher side of things, for example, in my district, we are required to have, there's a list of 9 present levels that we are required to have in the IEP. So that's basic reading skills, which is decoding, that's reading fluency, reading comprehension, written expression, math calculation, math problem solving, pre-vocational, which then once you're past the age of 14, that turns into vocational, and then social emotional behavior, adaptive behavior, and communication. And so I think that's 10 altogether. I have to run through the list every time I'm writing the IEP in case, just to make sure I don't forget something. And so that is one thing that for our district, they're requiring us to list if the student is exceptional in that area and needs support in that area, we have to have a present level written, and we have to have a goal that addresses that present level. And so just wanted to point that out. Other districts do it differently. I know Eric can speak to his district in Kentucky, and other states will do it all differently. But for example, that's what we are required to have in our IEP.
Yeah, that sounds very similar, really, actually, of how it works in Kentucky, too. So next, we're going to get into the meat of the IEP. And so I wanted to kind of go through that process, and I'll hit on these real quick, because the heart and the soul of the IEP are really the present levels, your annual goals, and your services and supports. And so with the present levels, as we talked about in great detail, you're going to paint a real clear picture of the student, and that student should be based upon their academic needs. To give a specific example, it may be that they are struggling with writing, and therefore, obviously an alternate pencil may be necessary for a child with Angelman syndrome. Their functional needs, are they able to help themselves go to the restroom? And if not, what are their present needs to help them have that function take place? It's important that that happens. It happens regularly, and how does it get addressed? It should always be, the present level should be based on data, checklists, observations that are taking place of the student. The data could be IEP data based on goals. The checklist could be checklists that are very formative and summative, giving feedback, and the observations can be very, what I would say, qualitative or anecdotal observations, but with a specific thought in mind. Are we seeing something that is a functional reaction to a behavior? Therefore, we need to kind of look at that. And then it should have, lastly, the needs are identified here of the student, which really drive the necessity of putting together the goals, which is the next component. You develop the annual goals based upon the needs. And so for every need identified in the present level, there should be a very specific goal. And it should be measurable, it should be realistic, and the student should be able to make progress with that goal. So, you have to kind of think about those things, as you develop goals. There are lots of examples, and I know Michelle is going to speak about that here in a second, but there are tons of examples that you can use, even with the Angelman Syndrome IEP Bank, Angelman Syndrome Foundation IEP Bank, that'll help guide you through the process of understanding. But again, I want to be clear, it's an individual education program, so each student is very different than the other. And so last is the who can support, or the service and support, so who will provide what kind of instruction What kind of assistance? Where will the instruction take place? Is it going to be in a small group, self-contained classroom setting, or is it going to be in the mainstream and the regular education classroom with support? Who's going to be educated with the students? Is it going to be with students? Are your students going to be, our children going to be with students that are without disabilities? Are they going to be with students with disabilities? All of those things need to be taken into consideration, and really that's kind of the heart of the IEP. So Michelle, I'm going to turn it back over to you and let you talk about the next slide and give some examples.
All right. And I'm kind of losing my connection. I'm in and out, so I just want to make sure, Eric, that are we on the present level? The 4 examples, right?
The what? Say again?
The 4 examples for the present levels.
Yes, there's some present level 4 examples. Yes.
Okay, I'm following along on the PowerPoint separately from the internet connection. So yeah, so like Eric said, we have 4 examples in here. I want to point out that we wanted to put examples in here in an effort just to show how the present levels can be linked directly to the goals, and just kind of give examples for those that are still kind of new to IEPs of what it can look like. But please know that that it is very individualized, obviously, you know, the whole definition of an IEP, and very dependent on the district and how they are training their special educators to be writing IEPs. So the first one that we have is a present level in the area of math. There's not too much text on this slide, but just wanted to point out that on the next 3 there's a lot of text, and so I'm just going to kind of slide over them for the purposes of the presentation, but I'm more than happy to talk about them individually after, or send anybody that was interested more text, and I have even more examples in general. Anyway, so math, I just wanted to point out, it starts out with you know, our formal kind of formal assessment and the test of early mathematics ability administered in September 2014. Here's the standard score, but then it goes into observations. He was only able to receptively identify 3 numbers. With those 3 numbers, he's relatively inconsistent. And then something he can do, he can count up to 2 objects consistently, but then past 2, that's where he struggles. So then an annual goal derived directly from that, given a number 1 through 10 in manipulatives, he'll count out a set of the given number with so much accuracy, how often you're going to measure that, how you're going to be measuring that by a certain date. And so this annual goal format you'll see on all of these slides, but it's very specific with, you know, given here's our situation, and then a specific behavior that we can see, well, not necessarily behavior, but some sort of outcome, whether that's behavior, whether that's a worksheet where I can see exactly what work you did. You want the goal to be as specific as possible so that it's, everybody knows what you're collecting data on. So the parents, as parents, you understand what they're going to be working on with your child, and as teachers, you understand what you're supposed to be working on with the child. So then an example of how the service of what it would look like in the IEP of how you could reach that goal would just look like academics instruction in a special ed setting with a teacher for 30 minutes each day. That's just really generic, broad example of how you could accomplish a math goal on the IEP. So then the next example is communication. Again, here's a lot of text on here, so I'm just going to kind of glide over it. Starting out, I always like to start out with my kind of more formal data. So this one says, according to the functional communication profile, talked a little bit about that. Jane, you know, always communicates this way. She sometimes communicates this way. What she can do is in there. Where she's struggling or inconsistent with is towards the end. And then another annual goal derived directly from that present level, given picture symbol to represent her wants and needs throughout the day. She'll give the picture to an adult to communicate her wants and needs. And so there's a specific instance that we're seeing she's communicating her wants and needs to an adult with certain verbal prompts, and then how often we're going to measure that and take data on that. And then an example of a service that could be written into the IEP to accomplish that would be speech therapy, you know, for 30 minutes, 2 times a week, something like that. So then the next example, adaptive behavior. Again, that's a domain that my district requires us to write a present level in, and I feel like that's a pretty common area for especially kids with Angelman syndrome to be working on. Starting off with a more formal systematic adaptive behavior characteristics checklist, shows where his weaknesses are. It looks like here with personal hygiene, then moves into kind of observations. He needs full supervision to move about the school. He currently will work independently for 2 to 3 minutes, but then what he'll do, instead, and then kind of finishing up with more of his weaknesses. He doesn't understand safety issues without supervision. Continues on like that. So then a goal from that, given a task targeting an already acquired skill, he'll work independently for how long, with what kind of prompts we're going to see. And I just wanted to point out that the past couple of goal examples haven't been percentages because they're more geared towards prompting levels. Basically, I wanted to point out that goals don't always have to be written as a certain percentage. And the example that I like to give is if you're saying, if your goal is written as Susie will cross the street safely on 80% of opportunities, well, what's with the other 20%? You can't cross the street safely not 20% of the time. So that would be a goal that's more appropriate to be addressed with prompts. So just something to think about as you're looking at goals. And then how you would accomplish, again, the general 30 minutes a day, and you'd probably want more service time than that to accomplish a lot of adaptive behavior goals, but just kind of an example of what that would look like on the IEP. And then the last example that we have here is in the pre-vocational domain. And so this is obviously for a younger student who's not yet in the vocational domain of kind of the transition timeline IEP, but pre-vocational would be all kind of the skills that are, working independently, learning time and money, and following a schedule and things that can help with that future vocational domain. That's how my district at least looks at it. So this one, we have a pre-vocational checklist that we use, and so that's kind of listed first as our more formal data. Then it goes into observations that you see what she has trouble with, what she can do. So then the annual goal is written as during time spent in proximity to peers, she'll keep her hands to herself, maintain appropriate personal space. So there's a specific behavior that I know that I can see when she's accomplished this goal after we've been instructing her and working on it. The criteria, with no more than 2 prompts on a certain amount of days. That's how I know she's accomplished that goal when it's been met with no more than 2 prompts on 4 consecutive days. And then an example of service time to accomplish that would be teacher assistant support during recess, lunch, and related arts times, because again, this goal is in the goal is written as during time spent in proximity to peers. So obviously the service time to accomplish this goal wouldn't be in a special ed setting for 30 minutes a day with the teacher, because this is a goal where we're looking at our behavior around other kids. So that being said, we're going to move along to the transition plan. Eric, is this you or me?
Actually, I think we may be off a little bit, but I'll speak to the first slide, and then I'll let you go to the next slide here. So the federal law states at age 14, planning, italicized here, must start. So it means you need to start thinking about post-school goals, and they should be developed, and a transition service needs to be identified. What will that look like? And really, that's important to think about. It has, like with my daughter, I've got a 12-year-old and then by 18, the needed transition services must be implemented. So what does that mean? You got to begin thinking about it now. Like myself, I really have given a lot of thought to what's this going to look like for both Ella and Elsie as they move forward. You know, is it going to be that they're going to run a special needs art studio? According to my wife, maybe so. I don't know. And you really, because she's passionate, but through her passion, my daughters have become passionate, you know, or will it be that they work in the horse industry? Again, the passion's there for both our girls, so it could be that way. So I'm going to let Michelle a little bit talk about the next slide, which transition services, what they are really.
Right. So Eric touched on that a little bit there, but it really is, and this italicized, you know, a coordinated set of activities that comes directly from the law, which does leave it up for relative interpretation across each district. So it's going to look a little differently wherever you are. But in general, it needs to be a results-oriented process and focus on movement from school to post-school activities. So like Eric was talking about, what are they going to do in the future and where are they right now? How can we help them while they're still in school to get ready for and accomplish that in the future? And so like number 2 says, it's going to be based directly on the student's strengths and interests. So if they're interested in art, if they're interested in horses, how can we help turn that into a meaningful vocational experience for them or leisure activities for them post-school? So this encompasses all instruction, experiences, etc. in this could include post-secondary education, any sort of vocational education, supported employment while they're in high school still, or the transition, the critical transition ages, which my brother is in right now, where he did his 4 years at high school, and now he's 2 years into the community-based transition program in their district, and so he has 2 years left in that, and so they're working on supported employment where he goes to some of the local restaurant chains and I laugh because it's pretty funny to think about him doing this, but it's great. This is, you know, he's learning a valuable skill. He's, you know, setting up the napkins on the tables and getting all the silverware where they need to go and things like that. Another thing, independent living and other daily living skills, things like cooking, laundry, you know, caring for yourself, all sorts of independent living skills are crucial to start working on, you know, in high school and a crucial part of transition plans and services. And then lastly, community participation, ensuring that there's access to the general community using public libraries, public transportation, you know, going to leisure activities, joining a basketball league or any other interest that they have as a sort of you know, leisure pastime, because we can't just work all the time. So yeah, so in general, that's, you know, transition services and plans could incorporate all of those things, and so there really is kind of a relatively endless boundary in that sense.
It's exciting to think about those things as I get closer to that with my daughters, and just to hear Michelle talk about it, you know, it truly is an exciting time to see those things maybe come to fruition for your children, and really these transition services help make that come to fruition. So here we are towards the end of the PowerPoint. We're going to talk about the last parts, which are, you know, what do you do after the meeting? And a lot of times this is the thing that kind of frustrates parents, you know, and we're going to really dedicate actually a future webinar that actually will address if you don't necessarily agree with the IEP team, or in our district we call it an admissions release committee. If you don't, there are some things, but let's talk about it for right now. So I think we have, let me look here. I'm going to kick this first one, and then I'll let Michelle talk about the second one here. So on the first screen here, you know, you've been through the entire document. Meeting's coming to a close. You agree? That's great. Sign everything. Give yourself a pat on the back and reveal revel in the fact that you and your child's teachers are on the same page, which can happen in a utopian society a lot of times. And you know, I'm not saying that it's difficult, but there's always going to be finessing. And I say finessing because, you know, I have definitely seen that. And I expect it as the school counselor and the person who sees, you know, 50 something of these meetings every year as a chair, and sometimes more for that matter. It's not always going to be smooth sailing. So there is going to be some disagreement. And here are just some helpful tips. I always suggest before you go to a meeting, prepare for the meeting. Talk to the teachers and the providers. Review your last year's IEP. Think about your child's strengths and their needs. Write down the goals for this school year. Think about what those goals are, and then really practice what you want to say. And I even say take it to the next level. Take your own agenda into the meeting. Write some of your own goals using some of the goals that are available in the IEP bank for your child. Share those goals with your committee prior to the meeting, because really that's a great way to get started. You know, it's a great way to, you know, to move forward. If you're going to disagree, it sure helps you to kind of move forward with the next steps. And so, like, I'm going to turn it now to Michelle, and she can talk a little bit more about that process.
Right. So number 2 we have here is actively participate and advocate during the meeting. And so this first bullet point, I can't stress how important this is. If you don't understand something, ask. It's hard. I, as a teacher, am writing, I mean, I have 3 IEPs, huge IEPs coming up in the next 2 weeks, and I spend I spend so much time writing IEPs, and I'm so familiar with how to read them and how to interpret them that I know that it is very confusing, even when I'm trying to explain it to the general education teachers that I work with, you know, why they have to be written a certain way and everything like that. And so if anybody on the team is referring to test results and you're not understanding what that means, ask. If they're talking about certain observations that they're seeing, ask, because maybe you're seeing something different at home, which is okay. You just, you know, make sure that you clarify and are all on the same page. Then leading to our second bullet, if you don't agree, that's totally fine, but make sure that you state that. There should always be somebody taking notes during the meeting, and your disagreements and what is being said should be reflected on that notes page. Be prepared and offer suggestions for what you would agree with. If you're saying, you know, I don't really agree with that, what if we tried XYZ? You know, be leading to our next bullet, be open to compromise in that sense, and think about, hopefully you've prepared beforehand and have talked to the teachers about what kind of what the draft of the IEP is looking at, what their thoughts are for goals and services, et cetera, and are, you know, coming prepared with what you would be okay agreeing to, or what you would agree with. And then this last bullet here, before you really get into like major disagreements, don't assume the worst. Yes, school districts do have their own interests to protect, and are often just trying to follow, teachers especially are often trying to follow what we have been told and asked to do. But remember that most of us enter this field because they care about kids and students with special needs. So I know that often doesn't seem like the case, but just something to think about before you're majorly in any mediation or anything like that.
Yes.
So for our next slide, yeah, take it away, Eric.
Yeah, so, you know, a couple other things. You know, ask that items and your concerns you really feel strongly about be documented in the meeting notes, and I know Michelle's talked about that. You have the right through your, you know, through the law to review the notes before you leave the meeting, really to ensure your concerns are documented in the notes section. And if you can't come to an agreement or even a compromise for that matter, you may ask for some other testing to be done, or you may give the team more information, you know, that they may need to make a decision. And so sometimes parents of children with special needs, to be quite honest, are some of the most dedicated and passionate advocates that you'll find. And I don't say that really, I mean, because I know I'm definitely married to one, and I am one myself, that we're very dedicated and diligent about trying to help our daughters be the most successful they possibly can. And at times, we do have disagreements, but we have to also let them know that we're going to have some more information come back to us before we really make a decision. And so that's fair. I think that you do that, and then at the sign the page that you need, that you participate in the meeting. If you don't agree, you don't do not sign giving your consent to implement the IEP. You have 14 days on either to either sign that page or begin due process remediation. So anyhow, that's one of the processes that you can go through, and that kind of brings us to the last part, which is, we want to spend a little time this evening. We've taken 45 minutes of your time and given you lots of information, but through our moderator, well, we want to let you ask us some questions. So, Michelle, this is a good way to segment into moving into questions. So let's open it up for that.
All right, so we've only actually had one so far come through. So if anybody does have any questions, please feel free. You can actually either type it in the questions box or the chat box. Either way. Oops, we're getting some more. Thank you. So one of the questions that we had is, do you have any suggestions for requesting a one-on-one aid?
Well, Michelle, I just have some experience with this personally, and we're going
I
to.
was going to say, yeah, Eric, in our last conference call, you mentioned that I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but the FCIA thing, and I've looked into that, and I think that's really helpful. So I would love it if you could talk about that.
So in California, they have an assessment that they utilize in many districts, and it's being implemented in the state of California called a SKIA assessment. It's not currently being implemented in Kentucky, but is something that I've referenced most recently with a family in California. But SKIA is an acronym for Special Circumstance Instructional Aid. And really what it addresses is that they have in California, they have a very distinct timeline. I think they look at it from an 8-week segment of time. And during that time, there should be a formal assessment to determine what are the special circumstances related to the request for an instructional aid to be provided for a child who may have some truly special circumstances. So those special circumstances, I think, always will go back to your present levels. It's the 10 domains that were mentioned earlier, and typically I think the most success for those tend to be focused more around the health and vision section. Maybe the communication with aided language is becoming extremely popular too. It's not necessarily speech communication, it's really the whole concept of aided language. And this is something that my wife and I have been talking about too, because we're in the beginning stages of a little due process that we're working through in Kentucky, because we having moved from a relatively lower full inclusion with some minor breakout time for resource to a more restrictive setting. But in doing so, they've backed away a lot of the supports for one-on-one because they are in a self-contained classroom. And in doing such, though, we feel like we're losing some of that modeling, that ongoing prompting that Michelle talked about earlier that really needs to be in place, and also some health concerns that need to be addressed with our daughter too. So my answer to your question is this: request a formalized assessment to determine whether your child's needs can be, really do require some special circumstances to be considered. And you can reference the California SKIA assessment, which is being implemented. And if that's your state, there is something in California to help you. And if not, a lot of other states are, adapting to that process as well. 8 weeks of assessment, and then determining whether there is really a need for special needs, special circumstance instructional assistant. Great question.
Okay, a couple more. One is, this person's been told based on the, I think it's IU format, typically a half-hour speech session is advisable for a child that takes a while to warm up to a therapist. How do we approach requesting a longer session?
Okay. First of all, if you were to explain that in the meeting and talk about it, I think that's the way to, really just explaining that and explaining your reasoning for wanting a longer session would hopefully start some dialogue with, questions to ask the speech therapist is how often do you see this, my child, and what is your relationship like with them, to where is it something that, if they can establish the relationship in the beginning of the year, that then they'll have that established relationship, and the, a 30-minute session would be doable during the week. Another option is, would it be better if they see them each day so that it's just a part of their schedule? And so I'm not saying 30 minutes each day, but would it be possible to do like 10 or 15 minutes each day and kind of hit them, so then that way they're having that established relationship and not taking so long to warm up. And so I think the way to approach that in a meeting would be just kind of look at all of the options and see how, what that SLP specifically is doing to establish the relationship with the student. I hope that kind of answers the question.
I think you nailed it. I think it's about rapport, though. I think rapport building is critically important, and I'll take it one step further from just speech-language pathology, but even before the 3-year annual reevaluation, where you're going to do some standardized testing, regardless of what that testing is going to look like, that school psychologist who may be unfamiliar to your son or daughter requests that they develop rapport prior to administering any standardized testing on your child.
Okay, and then we have one more question, and I am going to actually, I'll ask it, but I also would like you guys as the resource team to maybe look into some more information, because it's more based on Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So we have somebody who has just moved here from India, and the family will be joining her in November. So can you guys give her any tips on how she should get started, or anything that she should have in place before her child comes over from India?
Well, that's a great question. Glad that she is listening tonight. And first and foremost, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I could look into it, but I would want to determine a couple questions. My first question would be, it's probably, I'm making a hypothesis here that English will be a second language. And in consideration of that, that would be something to take into consideration when developing the initial IEP, or even the service plan. We call them PSPs, personal service plans, for what we call English language learners. So it's a little compounded by the fact that a nonverbal individual is learning often what I would consider to be a second language, which is augmentative alternative communication. But in the United States, it's most likely that that is going to be delivered in the English language. That can present some challenges, although I have consulted with a family in Kentucky who is going through something like that. They're from Austria. Obviously, German is the primary language spoken in the home. They want to keep that as a major component for their child, but they also understand that within the school setting, there may need to be some obviously specially designed instruction, which would include potentially an interpreter plus an interpreter with some special education skills using augmentative alternative communication. So the start would be to reach out to the district's ESL or ELL department, which is English Language Learners, or English as a Second Language. department. And then next is go ahead and try to obtain any documentation from the home country, have it translated into the English language or as needed to verify that there is in fact the diagnosis of Angelman's, which in turn should start the process of developing the IEP. The IEP and the meeting will not be able to take place until there is a determination for the need of enrollment, so it won't be able to be fully addressed until the child is actually within the United States and therefore needing services for a free appropriate public education.
I agree completely with Eric, and just wanted to point out, you know, it's hard to know what, if you're able to kind of, you know, shop around, so to speak, for schools, but if there's a better school district, you know, that you could look into, or a better school itself within the district that's kind of known for their special ed services, if there's a way to kind of get that established before she gets here and arrives, I know that would, I'm sure that would be beneficial for the future. So, and also I think just becoming familiar with the district and the school's kind of process, and looking into their Department of Special Education, what services they do offer through their special ed department, if there's speech, if there's OT, if there's PT, kind of the range of, if they're kind of a full inclusion district, if they have separate, you know, life skills classrooms and things like that. Just kind of being aware of what opportunities are out there and what the process is for going through the IEP meetings. If you don't agree, you know, looking into their due process kind of rules and regulations, and just, I guess, being prepared overall about the district's procedures itself. I think it's something that could be beneficial to look into as well.
Good stuff, though.
Yeah, thank you. All right, and I'll send you guys her contact information too, so just in case she has any other questions, or maybe if you know anything specific about the Milwaukee area that we can help her out. So it looks like that's it, that all the questions that have come through. If anybody has any questions that they think about later, you can go ahead and send them through to info@angelman.org, and we will forward those to the appropriate people to answer for you. I want to thank you again for joining us tonight, and also thank Eric and Michelle for taking the time to do this webinar, and I hope everybody has a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.